She followed every rule. She stayed calm, kept her voice steady. And still, they treated her like a criminal and forced her out. But everything changed the moment her husband showed up and made the entire airport regret what they had done. Tanya Miles wasn't late. That's the thought that ran through her mind as she rolled her small Navy suitcase across the shiny airport floor toward the security checkpoint. It wasn't even noon yet. Her flight to Phoenix was still an hour and a half away. She had plenty of time. Time to grab some water, maybe a magazine, and take a breath. It had already been a tough week. Her daughter's dentist bills, last-minute changes at work, and now this business trip for a client she didn't even like. But Tanya was used to handling stressful moments with grace. That's just who she was. The airport felt like most airports, fast, cold, and rushed. But Tanya didn't mind. She kept her head down and followed the signs. She passed through TSA smoothly, no problems. As she walked toward gate B6, she noticed little things around her. A young mom arguing with her toddler over snacks. A man loudly typing on his phone. The gate agent calling out standby names. All normal airport things. Tanya found a seat near the window and took out her book. About 10 minutes later, boarding began. Group 3 was called. That was her group. She stood up, grabbed her suitcase, and stepped into line. When she reached the front, the gate agent, an older man with thin blonde hair, name badge reading K. Delaney, scanned her boarding pass without even looking at her. "Ma'am, this bag won't fit in the overhead," he said flatly, pointing to her suitcase. Tanya blinked. "It's a standard carry-on. I've flown with it many times this year." Delaney didn't even flinch. "Not on this flight. You'll need to check it." She smiled politely. "I'm not trying to argue, but I can't check this bag. It has medication I need to keep with me." For the first time, he actually looked at her. Something changed in his eyes. They narrowed. "You're holding up the line, ma'am," he said. "Louder now." Tanya could feel the people behind her shifting, getting restless. She kept her voice calm. "I'm not trying to make this hard. I just really need to keep this bag with me. If you want, I can take out the medication." "You're being uncooperative," he snapped, cutting her off. That word hit her like a slap. "Sir, I'm trying to have a conversation," she said carefully. "There's no need for this to become a problem." He waved to another employee nearby, a younger woman in uniform. "Get security." Tanya froze. "Wait, are you serious?" "You're being combative, ma'am. Please step aside." Her heart raced. She looked around, hoping anyone would speak up, but most people avoided her gaze. A few quietly pulled out their phones and started recording. The mother with the toddler pulled her child closer. "Sir, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't swear. I didn't threaten anyone," Tanya said firmly. "Security is on their way. Please step aside now." Tanya slowly stepped back, hands visible, lips pressed tight. She wasn't going to add fuel to whatever this was. 2 airport police officers arrived less than a minute later. She calmly explained the situation to them, just as she had to the gate agent. They didn't ask many questions. They simply told her she was being removed for not following instructions. One officer gently held her elbow as they walked her away from the gate. She wanted to scream, not out of anger, but at the pure absurdity of it. She had done nothing wrong. She knew it. Everyone in the line knew it. But it didn't matter. They led her past other gates, down a hallway to a small waiting area with blue plastic chairs. One officer told her to wait there. Someone from airport management would speak with her soon. Then they left. Tanya sat alone. She looked at her phone. One missed call from her husband, Morris. She let out a shaky breath and called him back. He answered on the first ring. "Morris." Her voice trembled. "What happened?" he asked quickly, his voice calm but firm. "I got kicked off the flight." A pause. "Why?" "Over my carry-on. They said I wasn't cooperating." "Where are you now?" "In a waiting area near Gate B. I don't even know exactly where. They just walked me here." "Stay there," he said. "I'm already parked." What happened next made everyone in the waiting area stop and watch. Morris didn't stroll in. He walked with purpose. His steps were quick, his shoulders square, briefcase in hand. The kind of walk that made people turn twice. He passed a sandwich kiosk, a group of teens dragging skateboards, and a woman juggling coffee and her passport. He didn't notice any of it. He spotted Tanya right away. She was sitting tall, legs crossed, hands tightly clasped in her lap, like she was holding herself together. Her lips didn't move when she saw him, but her eyes said everything. "Hey," Morris said softly, crouching in front of her. "You okay?" She gave a small nod, not trusting her voice. He didn't push. Instead, he turned to the nearby passenger support desk. A young man in a navy vest looked up. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yes," Morris said calmly but firmly. "My wife was removed from her flight. I'd like to know why. And I'd like to see the security footage from the gate." The agent blinked. "I'm not sure we can do that." "You can. I'm formally requesting it. Please get your supervisor." The agent hesitated, then picked up the phone. Tanya finally let out a slow breath. "I didn't yell, Maurice. I didn't curse. I just didn't want to check my bag." "I know," he said. "You don't have to explain anything to me." Within 5 minutes, 2 supervisors arrived. One had a name tag that said C. Jensen, and the other just had supervisor stitched on his shirt. Both of them were smiling, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach their eyes. "Mr. and Mrs." Jensen began. "Miles," Maurice said, "and before we continue, let me make this clear. I'll be formally requesting all communications, videos, and audio connected to this incident. I also want the names of every staff member involved." "Sir, I assure you," the other supervisor started. "There's no need to assure me," Maurice said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm not looking for comfort. I'm looking for answers." The mood in the room shifted. Everyone could feel it. "At least tell us, what exactly led to her removal?" Maurice asked. "She was uncooperative with the gate agent," Jensen replied, now choosing his words more carefully. "She refused to follow a direct order to check her bag." "I told him I had medication in the bag," Tanya said quietly. Jensen blinked. "No one told us that." "Because no one asked," she said. "No one cared." Maurice turned toward the supervisors. "Did anyone actually look inside the bag?" "No, sir." "Then how can you say she was being difficult?" They didn't answer. Around them, other travelers had started to slow down. Some people had stopped walking completely. They were watching now. This wasn't just another airport moment anymore. One woman whispered to her friend. She's the one they kicked off the plane. Someone else was quietly filming from across the hallway. Maurice didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't have to. She's a paying passenger. She followed the rules. And now you've embarrassed her in public. For what? Because someone in uniform chose to push the situation instead of calming it down. Jensen cleared his throat. "We'll look into this more carefully." Maurice looked him straight in the eye. "I hope so, because I know exactly what FAA guidelines say. I know what your company policies require. And I know what bias looks like when people try to hide it behind rules." Silence. Then a third airport official, a woman this time, hurried over, holding a folder. "Sir, we're reviewing the security footage now. Would you and your wife be willing to speak with our head of security?" Tanya stood. "Now you want to listen?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was steady, strong. "You didn't listen when I stayed calm. You didn't listen when I explained myself. You only started listening when you saw who my husband was." Jensen took a step back. "That's not what this is about." "But it is," Tanya said. "That's exactly what this is about." But Tanya wasn't alone, not anymore. They were taken to a small meeting room. There was nothing there but a long table, 6 chairs, and a screen on the wall. The colors were dull, the air was cold, the windows sealed tight. No warmth at all. Tanya and Maurice sat across from 2 security officers and a woman in a dark blazer. Her ID badge was flipped backward, the letters too small to read anyway. The woman introduced herself as Lynn Ortega, Director of Passenger Relations for the airport. Her voice was the kind people are trained to use in tough situations, calm, careful. But her fingers tapped nervously on the table. "We've watched part of the security footage," she said, pointing to the screen. "We'd like to show it to both of you." Maurice crossed his arms. "We're not here to watch videos. We're here because my wife was humiliated. She was removed and treated like a threat because of the bag. You've seen enough. Just tell us, what did the video show?" Ortega took a breath. "It shows that the gate agent overreacted. Your wife stayed calm. She wasn't aggressive. She didn't raise her voice. She clearly told him she had medicine in her bag." Maurice looked at Tanya, then back at Ortega. "Then why was security called?" "I don't have a good answer for that," Ortega admitted. Tanya leaned forward. "I do, because I didn't back down. I didn't act afraid. I didn't say yes, sir, and let him walk all over me." No one in the room spoke. Maurice opened his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. "Here's my formal request for all reports tied to this incident. I want employee statements, all communication records, and a copy of the security footage." "Understood," Ortega said, her voice shifting slightly. Maurice continued. "I also want the names of everyone who made the decision to remove my wife. I'm not filing complaint. I'm building a record. There's a difference." His words were sharp. There were no threats, no loud moments, just quiet strength. Tanya didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Maurice had control now, but not the kind that silences others. The kind that makes everyone in the room pay attention. "I want to be clear," he went on. "This isn't about getting someone fired. This is about a pattern. My wife isn't the first black woman to be treated like a problem before she's treated like a person. Your agents have too much power and not enough proper training. This isn't just a one-time mistake. It's part of a bigger issue." Ortega looked down at her notes. "We take these matters seriously. I'm sure you do. When there's a paper trail, when a lawyer shows up, when someone starts talking about the media. But what about the people who don't have someone to stand up for them?" One of the security officers shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. Maurice kept going. "Do you know what would have happened if Tanya had raised her voice? Even once?" No one answered. She would have been restrained. Probably banned from flying with the airline. Her name flagged. And the story you'd tell wouldn't sound anything like the truth. Ortega spoke. "We want to make this right." Tanya finally spoke. "Then stop acting like this was just a mistake. You keep calling it an unfortunate situation. It's not. It's the result of a system that sees people like me as threats, just because we stand our ground." Ortega nodded slowly this time. "I hear you." Morris's expression didn't change. "You hear us now, because you're cornered." Outside the room, life at the airport carried on. The boarding calls echoed through the halls. A flight to Austin was leaving. Someone was being paged over the loudspeaker. Nothing had changed out there, but something had definitely shifted in here. "I'll be reaching out to the local press," Maurice said as he stood. "And when they ask why my wife was taken off that flight, without cause, I'll hand them your report, the one where your own security footage proves her story." Ortega stood too, her voice slower now. "We'll issue a formal apology immediately." "That's a start," Tanya said. But Maurice wasn't just looking for an apology. He was about to change everything. When they walked back into the terminal, they didn't look like victims. Tanya held her head high. Maurice walked right beside her, not ahead, not behind. They walked together, step for step. You could feel it, the shift in the air, before anyone said a word. The same people who had watched Tanya being walked out now watched her return. But they looked at her differently now. Some looked with recognition, some with guilt. Some were quietly recording again, their phones raised but their voices silent. The first person to come up to them wasn't security. It was a man in a gray polo with a radio on his belt. "Mr. Miles," he said. "I'm Director Ken from Airport Operations." Maurice didn't shake his hand. "I'm listening." Ken cleared his throat. "We decided to place the gate agent involved on temporary leave while we investigate." Tanya's voice cut in. "Does that mean someone finally told him he was wrong?" "We're reviewing the full situation." "No," Tanya said firmly. "I want to hear you say it. I wasn't wrong. He was..." Ken paused and gave a slow nod. "Yes, ma'am. Based on what we've seen so far, the situation was handled badly." For the first time that day, Tanya smiled. Not because she was happy, but because someone had finally said out loud what everyone else had avoided. We've also arranged for both of you to fly first class on the next available flight, Ken added. No extra charge, of course. Maurice raised an eyebrow. We didn't ask for upgrades. I know it's just a gesture. Tanya stopped him. Don't offer me silence all morning and then try to fix it with a seat upgrade. That's not what this is about. Ken took a step back. Understood. And just like that, the way people treated him changed. Other passengers started speaking up. I saw what happened, said a woman near Gate B6. You handled it with so much grace. I was really sorry to see it. A young man with a laptop bag added, I was on that flight. The way he treated you wasn't right. One by one, people began coming forward, not in a crowd, but steadily, and with them came their stories. A man quietly shared how his wife had once been pulled aside for questioning just because she seemed nervous. A grandmother told them her teenage grandson was once kicked off a flight for walking back to a seat too slowly. Tanya listened. Maurice took notes. He wasn't collecting sympathy. He was building something bigger. Then a reporter arrived. Short hair, notepad ready. Calm in that way reporters get when they know the story is important. Mr. and Mrs. Miles, would you be willing to speak on camera? She asked. Tanya looked at Maurice. He didn't say anything, just gave her the choice. I will, Tanya said, not because I want attention, because I want people to understand what it feels like to be made invisible, to be seen as a threat before anyone even asks you what's going on. The reporter nodded to her cameraman, and they began recording. Tanya stood in the exact spot where, just 2 hours earlier, she'd been removed. Same polished floor, same row of chairs. But this time, no one called security. No one pretended not to see. She spoke clearly, not with anger, but with honesty. I came here to catch a flight to Phoenix for work. I followed every rule. I stood in line like everyone else. But because I didn't accept what felt unfair, I was treated like a problem, not like a person. I want people to ask themselves, would this have happened if I looked different? If my voice didn't sound the way it does? If I'd been standing here with someone who looked like my husband from the start? The terminal fell quiet as an airport can get. People watched, not just with curiosity, but with that quiet guilt you feel when you realize you might have stayed silent too. Maurice didn't say a word. He let Tanya speak. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It never really had been. The interview lasted 5 minutes, but 5 minutes was enough. Enough for the local station to run the clip that same evening. Enough for it to spread online by the next morning. By the time their story aired that night on KPXC Channel 9, it had already been reposted on 3 local Facebook pages, shared by a former classmate Tanya hadn't spoken to in 15 years, and clipped into a 90-second TikTok by a college student who had been 2 gates away. The headline was simple and sharp. Black woman removed from flight over carry-on bag dispute. Airport reviewing policy after husband demands answers. It spread quickly, and with it came voices. Some supportive, some defensive, some angry, some relieved that someone had finally said what they'd felt for years. And then came the emails. Hundreds of them, from people Tanya and Maurice had never met. One from an older woman in Tallahassee. I cried watching your interview. My daughter went through the same thing at LaGuardia. We stayed quiet. I wish we hadn't. Another from a man in Oregon. I've worked airport security for 18 years. What happened to your wife is more common than most people think. Please don't let them bury this. This story wasn't just about Tanya anymore. It had grown bigger. It was about rules, about power, about how quickly people made decisions, not based on facts, but based on assumptions. 2 days later, Maurice was invited to speak on a local panel about civil rights and how the public is treated in shared spaces. Tanya didn't go to the event. She needed time for herself, but she watched the broadcast from home. Maurice never mentioned her name. He didn't talk about what happened at Gate B6. Instead, he spoke about silence, about how often people see something wrong right in front of them and still do nothing because they're afraid to cause a scene. He said clearly, silence doesn't keep you safe. It just protects the people who are doing harm. The moderator, a professor from Arizona State, nodded slowly. So what's the solution, Maurice? There's no single solution, Maurice said, but it starts with accountability. It starts with changing policies, with better training. And maybe most of all, it starts with believing people when they tell you what happened, even when there's no camera around. At home, Tanya sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea, scrolling through her inbox. She paused on one message from a woman in Ohio. The message read, "I work for an airline. We had a staff meeting this morning, and your story came up. Our supervisor played the video clip. I watched the entire room change. You changed the room." Tanya read it 3 times. Then she replied with just 2 simple words. "Thank you." The next morning, Tanya got a phone call from a woman named Marlene Alvarez. She worked for a nonprofit that focused on protecting travelers' rights. She asked Tanya if she would consider sharing her story at a roundtable event in Sacramento. "I'm not a speaker," Tanya said, her voice soft and unsure. "You don't need to be," Marlene replied. "You just need to be honest. And you already are." Tanya said she'd think about it. That night, she sat with Maurice on their back patio. The moon was out. The sky was clear. "I never wanted all this attention," she said. "I know," Maurice replied, "but I also don't want to act like it didn't happen." "You shouldn't." There was a long silence. Then she added, "I just don't want people to remember me as the woman who got kicked off a flight. I want them to remember that I spoke up, that I stood my ground." Maurice reached over and held her hand. "They will." But even with all the attention, there was something more personal Tanya needed to do. 2 weeks later, Tanya stood on a small stage at the Travel Equity Forum in Sacramento, California. She wasn't there for the spotlight. She was there because she finally decided it was time. The room wasn't packed. Maybe 100 people, maybe less, airline staff, advocates, reporters, and a few travelers with stories of their own. One man in the back quietly live-streamed. Tanya wore a navy blouse and black pants. No big microphone, just a small clip on her collar. The moderator introduced her briefly and stepped away. Tanya didn't clear her throat. She didn't shuffle any papers. She simply looked up and began. "When I walked into that airport in Raleigh, I didn't expect anything unusual. I had a meeting. I had my suitcase. I had everything in order." She paused. "But what I didn't have was the benefit of the doubt." The room went still. Everyone leaned in just a little. I didn't yell. I didn't insult anyone. I asked a question. I gave a reason. But instead of being heard, I was labeled, not for what I said, but for how I looked. And the hardest part? It happened fast. Faster than you'd think. She told the story. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. But with clarity. She described how the gate agent raised his voice before she ever raised hers. How security never once asked for her side. How her name didn't matter in the report until her husband showed up. That's what hurt the most. I needed credentials standing next to me before I was treated like a human being. A quiet sound moved through the crowd. People looked at each other. I'm not here to ruin anyone's job. I'm not here for attention. I'm here because I've lived with that moment. I know others have, too, and I'm tired of pretending we have to accept it just to keep things calm. She paused for just a second, then looked back up. "You know what kept me awake that night? Not the embarrassment, not the news stories. It was the fact that not one person in that boarding line spoke up. Not one." The room grew even quieter. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they didn't know what to say. So let me say this now, so no one has to wonder next time. If you see someone being treated unfairly, speak. If you see someone being embarrassed or mistreated, ask why. You don't need a degree or a badge to do what's right. Marlene Alvarez sat near the front, tears in her eyes. Tanya went on. She talked about how her daughter had asked, "Why don't people always believe black women?" She shared how long it took to feel like herself again. And she talked about choice. You don't always get to choose how people see you, but you can choose how you respond. You can choose to speak, even when it's easier to stay quiet. And maybe that choice will help someone else feel less alone. When she finished, the room didn't immediately clap. There was just a long, full pause, the kind of silence that comes after something real is said. Then the room stood, slowly, not out of politeness, but because they felt it. Afterward, a young flight attendant walked up to her. "I've seen things," she said quietly. "I didn't speak up before, but I will now." Tanya smiled, not big, not dramatic, just a quiet nod of understanding. Later that night, she and Maurice sat in their hotel room, watching the sunset through the window. "You were brilliant," Maurice said. "I was honest," Tanya replied. "That's harder." They didn't need to say much more. The truth had already been spoken, and the right people had heard it. ETSIIOYN chose KC moment new surprise. Se que la faken don't news traitens quelco unquan news pensons chuiel ne person dit tout. If there's one thing this moment taught us, it's that how we treat someone when we think they're nobody says everything. If you believe in fairness, dignity, and the power of standing up, don't just feel it. Say something. Share the story. Speak up when it matters. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that challenge, connect, and remind us who we really are.